Good.
We have.
So, all right, we're good.
It's a nice number because.
All right, here we go. I want to welcome everyone to the October Cvta Finance Committee meeting, and I'm happy to be here with you today on this beautiful fall day in the greater Richmond region. I hope each of you all are doing well and ready to get to work today. With that, let's make our way through the agenda. First, Ms. Firestone, would you certify that we have a quorum?
Yes, sir. Chesterfield County, Mr. Carroll.
Present.
Hanover County, Vice Chair Peterson.
Here.
Henrico County, Mr. Thornton.
Here.
City of Richmond, Chair Stoney.
Here.
Transportation Board, Mr. Brown.
Here.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call, and we have quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Firestone. All right, we'll begin with our agenda. We will not too long an agenda today, but it's all about how long we make it. Right? So we'll begin with item 1 today, consideration of amendments to the action meeting agenda. I have no changes to the agenda. Do we have any suggesting changes to the agenda? Ms. Heater? Suggesting changes to the agenda?
I would recommend that the committee consider going into a closed session during item 7 for the discussion of the RFP, financial advisor services selection process, just so that we can talk more specifically about the candidate proposals and scoring and that.
Ms. Heater suggests that we go into a closed session on item 7, request for proposal, financial advisory services and bond counsel. For a motion to do that,
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion, we amend the agenda on item 7 to allow for us to go in a special session.
there's a motion to the agenda to item 7 to go into closed session. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been seconded. So roll call vote necessary for that, Ms. Firestone? Yes. Roll call vote.
Chesterfield County, Mr. Carroll.
Yes.
Hanover County, Vice Chair Peterson.
Yes.
Henrico County, Mr. Thornton.
Yes.
City of Richmond, Chair Stoney.
Yes.
And Commonwealth Transportation Board, Mr. Brown.
Yes.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call for that item.
All right, the agenda has been adjusted. We'll now move on to item 2, the approval of the August 11th, 2021 and September 8th, 2021 Cvta Finance Committee action meeting of minutes. Do we have a motion to approve the August 11th, 2021 Finance Committee meeting minutes as presented?
Motion to approve.
Second. The minutes have been approved, or been a motion to approve the minutes, and there's been a second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Ayes have it. Also, it seems that we also need to approve the September 8th, 2021 Cvta Finance Committee action meeting minutes as well. Do we have a motion to approve those minutes?
A second.
So motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Ayes have it. Now, item 3 is the open public comment period. Are there any comments, public comments have arrived prior, or are there any individuals here to comment on anything before us today?
Mr. Chair, we didn't receive any prior requests to participate. Janice, do you have anyone as an attendee live that?
I have, hold on one second, sorry. No.
Okay, with our new format, if there is anyone virtual that wants to participate in meetings of this nature, we have a Q&A function in the Zoom platform, and you can submit questions at any time. So that's a new feature that we'll be moving forward with.
Thank you, Mr. Parsons. Seeing none, there will be no public comment. We'll move on to item 4, the Cvta Finance Committee Chairman's report. First, I want to thank Vice Chair Peterson for covering for me on the last couple of meetings.
Pleasure.
As things have gotten a little busy in the city, but also I was out of town in the state of Oregon as my little brother was getting married and I was serving as his best man. So Mr. Peterson, thank you for covering for me these last couple meetings.
You had your priorities straight, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I didn't want to be paying for that for the remainder of my life. But I also wanted to comment on a few audit takeaways and say how proud I am of this committee and all of our staff to help on this first year of the CVTA. The Central Virginia Transportation Authority is in good standing because of all of our hard work to complete the necessary organizational steps in a timely fashion, as well as because of the established financial procedures and practices. Thank you to both of our fiscal agents and finance directors working group for stepping up during this process as we continue to move the authority. Hopefully, with the help of an executive director, we will determine our project financing strategy to include reserves, investment strategy, and project allocation. So as we listen to the staff report today, let us keep in mind how we can create an overall strategy that accomplishes what we envision for the Fall Line Trail, as well as other regional significant projects to come. All right. Now I'll move on to item 5, the CVTA activities report. Mr. Parsons, Mr. Uri.
I was going to ask Martha if she wanted to give her update.
Thank you. I just have a couple of administrative updates before we move into the meat of the staff report to just share with the committee. From an upcoming agenda item topic, I just wanted to let you know that the finance work group has been discussing over the last couple of months, just going through the year-end closeout and those kinds of things. So I do think that we've identified in coordination with Debbie Basie a couple of areas that we want to recommend some clarifications or revisions to the financial policies document. So that will be coming back to you for kind of a first reading at your next committee meeting in November. And the idea would be that those proposed changes would come into the authority for the January meeting for consideration and approval. So just as a heads up of agenda items coming. And we'll be working with the finance director's work group prior to them coming back to this committee for review. Also wanted to share with you a couple of things. I know that this group has spoken quite a bit about inclusivity and supplier diversity. So I did want to share that Plan RVA has been working for the last few months to be able to develop a more inclusive purchasing program. So we did finalize that process. So we now have a new kind of way that Plan RVA will be procuring everything from our breakfast and coffee supplies all the way to our large scale purchases. So that we'll be very happy to extend those same purchases and preferences for supplier diversity, minority, women, locally owned businesses to the CVTA as well. So provided that there are no concerns, we will, as long as the Plan RVA is kind of administering the process for those things, we'll follow the Plan RVA procedures and policies. And I'd be happy to include our new guidebook in your upcoming committee agenda packet. Didn't get finished in time for this committee distribution, but we'd be happy to share that with you for the next meeting. So we're pretty excited about it. So I'm excited to get the word out. I also wanted to share with you that I know several of you have been party to conversations in the other entities that you serve on that are related to Plan RVA, but we have executed a task order to update the technology in this room. We're able to take advantage of a pretty nice grant opportunity from the Department of Emergency Management to be able to upgrade the audio and visual equipment and supplies in the room to be able to aid with frankly a better experience for those in the room, but also for those that are attending virtually. So I did want to ask if the CVTA would be interested in contributing to offset some of those costs. So I'll just throw that out there. And if there's guidance from the Finance Committee about how we would formally put that before you for consideration, certainly I'll take that advice. But we are moving forward with that and looking forward to the improved experience. And let's see, lastly, I wanted to ask, you may recall that CVTA holds its own organizational insurance policy with VRSA, the Virginia Risk Sharing Association. We have an opportunity to apply for a mini grant. Plan RVA has taken advantage of that the last couple of years for risk mitigation. It's, if I'm not mistaken, a $250 grant. So it's not a huge amount of money, but it helps to be able to undertake risk management or safety improvements with the entity. So for Plan RVA perspective, we're looking at installation. Last year, we installed an AED defibrillator unit downstairs. This year, we're looking at installing our Stop the Bleed case cabinet downstairs. And so we wondered if you would be interested in Plan RVA applying for the mini grant on behalf of Cvta. Idea would be maybe hand sanitizer stations, some other safety related items for the boardroom, since that's really what Cvta as an entity occupies is the boardroom. But I didn't want to put that forward without consulting the finance committee first.
Mr. Chair, question.
Mr. Carroll.
Is there a timeline that you need to get this in?
It's a rolling grant application. It opened in mid-August and it's just available until the funds are gone. So there's no deadline.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion that we authorize them to enter into the grant procedure, and that we send this forward to the full committee for approval.
There is a motion to authorize Plan RVA to seek the grant. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
It's been seconded. There's a question from
Are there matching funds required from CVT?
No, there aren't. The only kind of string, if you will, is that it's a reimbursement grant. So the purchase has to be made prior to the grant being awarded. So we have to show documentation of receipts.
All right, we have a motion and it's been seconded. I believe this will require a roll call vote. We're going to send it to the full body.
That would be fine, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Ms. Myers.
Chesterfield County, Mr. Carroll.
Yes.
Hanover County, Vice Chair Peterson.
Yes.
Henrico County, Mr. Thornton.
Yes.
City of Richmond, Chair Stoney.
Yes.
And Commonwealth Transportation Board, Mr. Brown.
Yes.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call for that item.
All right, Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Peters.
question. On your first item on the upgrades for this room, is this going to be permanently fixed to this room or is it relocatable? Should we move to another location?
Oh, great question. Yeah, all of the equipment that we're purchasing is actually considered to be mobile. So we won't be installing any of the equipment. I mean, of course, our microphones are already installed in the ceiling, but those are removable. So if Plan RVA were to decide to move, all of the equipment that we're purchasing will come with us.
Mr. Chair, follow-up question.
Mr. Carroll.
The equipment that you're going to purchase, would it be avail itself, as we've seen in the past, we've had to hold our meetings in other locations because of social distancing. Is it the type of equipment that we'd be able to use at another location, providing they at least had the Wi-Fi capabilities that we need as far as bandwidth? But is it that type of equipment that allow us to hold these meetings at another location, for example, that may not have the same capabilities?
Yes, we took care to kind of scope this in a way that it is mobile. I think from a staff perspective, we don't necessarily want to be moving it around once a week, but certainly in instances where the authority, for example, would prefer to meet at a location, for various circumstances, it would be able to be moved and set up. And all the visual equipment is on carts, if I'm not mistaken, Chet, and then all of the all the other speakers and those kinds of things are movable.
And I think part of the nature of the grant being emergency management is that it could be used for training exercises, those kinds of things that would require it to be mobile and set up in very different circumstances.
Mr. Chair, follow-up question.
Mr. Carroll.
So the amount of money in the grant, does it cover the total expenditure, or how much additional funds are required in order to be able to make the purchase?
The grant is $30,000 and the total scope of work is $39 and some change. So at this point, Plan RVA is planning to pick up the balance that the grant doesn't cover, but we obviously are interested in cost sharing with our partner organizations if that's of interest. And we can bring a full proposal back to the committee if it's something you want to consider. I wanted to bring it here. We'll be going over the task order with the executive committee of the commission tomorrow.
Any estimated costs at all at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, the scope is 39,000.
39, okay.
Yeah, and so the gap, if you will, that's not covered by the grant is about $9,800.
Okay. Mr. Chair,
Mr. Peters.
if I just may toss this out as a thought when you're putting together something for us, is this is going to be the capital property of Plan RVA. Might be better if CVTA participates in a usage fee rather than investing as a capital investment. Just because of I think we're going to be together for a good while, but at the same time, if we go different ways, we need to be paying for our use of it.
That makes sense. Yeah, we could look at it that way, sort of more of a fee structure perspective as opposed to investing. Yeah.
All right.
Future agenda topic.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Healy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I have distributed this morning a two-sided handout. Everyone should have that. I wanted to take a few minutes and review. This is essentially a discussion that the TAC has been having for the last few months. Following the October 24th approval of the prioritization framework that the full authority took action on, we are prepared to assist TAC in moving forward with prioritizing and ranking projects and taking the next steps to actually funding some improvements in the region. So we put together page 1 is essentially a summary of that framework document, and I wanted to take a few minutes of your time to run through this, and then page 2 is a proposed schedule that TAC took a look at. So, Mr. Chair, if it's okay, I'll start on page 1. The top half of the page is something that all of us know in terms of where the revenues come from and how those revenues are distributed. We are focused in this document on the 35% regional funds and those transportation projects that can be funded through those revenues. The 35% CVTA funds for regional transportation projects, we're estimating a rough ballpark of $65 million a year, or close to $400 million over a 6-year period. The 6-year period is a key number here. In order to spend the funds, state code requires the authority to develop this prioritization process based on analysis and considering benefit and cost in its evaluation. So the TAC established this 4-step process, which you see items 1 through 4 at the bottom of page 1. And this is the essential outline of the framework that was approved on the 24th. First step is an annual submission by each jurisdiction or participating agency to provide project information, understanding that there are a number of applications granted for each jurisdiction based on the number of weighted votes of each locality. And then a key point here is that the applications are divided into 7 different project types. So highways would not compete with trails, for example, or transit. Each type has its own category. The second item is screening, where staff would take the lead on evaluating project eligibility according to the framework guidance. And then TAC would take the responsibility of reviewing those eligible projects that staff provides and recommend scoring and ranking. The next step under item 3 is that staff would score and rank all those projects except for the bridges using 3 performance metrics. This was one of the key outcomes of the TAC discussion of the framework. It's a condensed version of what the TPO uses in its long-range plan evaluation, but it focuses on safety, mobility, and accessibility metrics for each of the types of projects that are submitted. And then bridge projects are evaluated using a separate criteria that the state uses, the state of good repair. And then the final step is the selection of projects. So staff would provide scored and ranked projects within each category. The Finance Committee would then provide 6 years of projected funding allocations so that TAC has an understanding of the full breadth of available funds for that 6-year period that's outlined in the state code. Staff would then take that budget and develop a funding scenario where each project that's identified and scored as a priority would be divided out among that 6-year period. And then TAC would review that funding scenario, recommend public review and approval, and the full authority would take responsibility for that public review, and then has ultimate discretion on selection and allocation of funds.
Just a point of clarification, and I'll make sure I remember this right. I believe the presentation was given on the 24th, but I don't believe we approved this as of yet. I think that'll come at our next meeting. So the presentation was given at the last meeting. I just want to make sure for those who are watching at home to know that they need to tune in for the next meeting. The full committee will take an action on the recommendations of the TAC. Am I remembering that correctly?
I believe so. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
A couple of questions. With regard to item 1C, the dividing of projects, so are you saying that when you're scoring projects of different media, for example, trails versus trails, you're not going to be scoring a trail versus a road expansion versus a highway project? They're on different scoring systems. Is that what you're suggesting?
The scoring system is essentially the same, but yes, you're on the right path. The ranking and prioritization would be separate.
So how do you normalize that, right? So how do you take so once you have scores for trails and scores for highways and scores for road expansions and sidewalks, how do you normalize it to get your overall ranking?
It's built into the evaluation tool. That's done already for the long range plan in terms of the normalization, but I think TAC has a full understanding, and the chair of that subcommittee that evaluated.
Mr. York.
No, actually, I'm considering the answer to your question, Mr. Brown. So it's a similar scoring process across all categories. It's essentially, we're keeping the categories separate so that it's a little bit more of an apples to apples comparison within each project category. So it's really more kind of, here's your comparison of highway projects, here's your comparison of trail projects. It's really for the most part, at the discretion of TAC and of the authority as which project out of those categories by jurisdiction they wish to fund.
So what I think I'm hearing, Mr. Chairman, is that you're going to have scores, but there won't be a normalization, right? So that means if a highway project scores, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10, and the top trails project scores 5, and a sidewalk project scores 6, we'll have that information, but essentially we'll have to, the broader authority will pick, so that you could have a lower scored trail project or a lower scored highway project that's selected to be funded, notwithstanding the fact that if you were to normalize the scores, you might not have any, for example, sidewalk projects funded.
Right, and that was a lesson that we took away from Smart Scale, and that, as we know, across the region, projects that were submitted for fall line generally did not score well, just because it was a across the board comparison to highway projects and other types of multimodal projects.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I could ask Mr. Peters to bring up one question I think is going to be important going forward, is in 4B. Our responsibility to provide the projections over 6 years is going to be very much tied to what, not just what we're getting, but also to whether we're looking at bonding and to what degree. So it's going to be, and that obviously will go back to affect what projects we can select.
Right.
So it's, I can see the complexity here.
Just one pivot off of that. So you would have your, again, scored projects in the various 7 categories, but because you can't do everything at one time, right? And you're talking about a 6-year projection. At Smart Scale, and Kim Pryor does some magic in the back room where she's able to stack and levelize the funding, because none of us want a project that takes 6 years to execute, right? So if you have a trail or a road project, you want to execute that in 2 or 3 years, or 1 year if possible, right? So I guess the other step that I haven't heard about is where do we then, so we provide that forecast. Is there some place where we then levelize the funding so that we say, okay, sidewalk project is going to be done in year 1, fully funded, but the road project won't start until year 3, and we're going to fund that year 3 through 5. I mean, where does that come into the discussion? Because that matters with regard to, again, what you can fund, right? Based upon the dollars that are available.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's actually under 4C.
Okay.
But we've called it the funding scenario. But it's very similar to the time bands that we set up in our long range plan,
Okay.
where we look at the phasing, especially for more complex projects where you have PE right away construction, and how that lays out over the 6-year period. So there may be projects that don't get PE until year 6, and then we have to bring in the right of way construction in a later year. But it's a lot like the transportation improvement program, where we adjust that on a as needed basis.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Thorpe.
throwing a little language here, I believe also what we could take from what Mr. Brown is suggesting. If you recall, the Cvta has used the word flexibility. You use the word normalizing. We could do the same approach. Sometimes it's a matter of semantics.
Mm-hmm.
So I would suggest that, that this is something that the TAC could use, which would be germane to what you're saying.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Carroll, just to add on what both colleagues have said, that again, what's going to be crucial for us is how we determine how we're going to fund these projects. For example, in the presentation that was given to the Finance Committee months back, when they talked about just taking 50% per year and putting the other 50% in a fund that could be utilized, number one, to build up a reserve, and 2, utilized for pay-as-you-go projects. That other 50% of the 35%, if we chose to do that in the future, would be ideal for what you're talking about. Be able to say, we'd be able to finance this sidewalk project in year 1 or this one in year 2 based on what those reserves and what those numbers look like. And then the bigger projects, if we did the bonding and generated the funds up front, then we could apply for matching scale and all this. Really, we're saying this for the people at home are going, I don't get it. So they understand that there will be some flexibility, as Mr. Thornton had said, on how we'll be able to achieve the objectives in the future. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Parsons, got anything else?
Yes, sir. I have page 2.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we stopped on
Page 2.
So this is the nitty gritty. So we've laid out a proposed schedule through the end of the calendar year to get an idea of the first round of projects. Yesterday at the technical meeting, there was discussion of the scoring and ranking of projects, and I think the guidance was given that staff can move forward with scoring and ranking. And then that the TAC would work with this body, the Finance Committee, to develop the budget with a focus on the first 2 fiscal years. But I think the ultimate outcome is that we want to look at all 6. But we understand that we're working through a filter that the fall line and some related projects in our rural jurisdictions are considered very important by the authority, and we're using that as the guidance to develop this schedule with an idea that later in this fiscal year, we'll focus on the full 6 years. So item 2, today's meeting, we wanted to give an overview of a number of things. VDOT made a presentation that at a previous meeting that the estimates that they have for the fall line segments are up to date and are being decided, I think, on a rolling basis as new sections, or if there are changes that need to be made to the estimated alignment. VDOT will be ready to make those changes, but right now they're confident in the estimates that they provided for the alignment that they have. 2C, we want to talk about the available funds. So as Mr. Peterson mentioned, the budgeting for that 6 years and especially the first two is very important right now because I think we have an understanding that the full length of the fall line is not able to be funded with the available regional funds for those first 2 years. So there will be a gap. And the hope is that the authority may be able to make a request or work with the governor's office over the short time frame to see if there's any opportunities to fill that gap. Because as we know, the authority's focus is on getting the full fall line done. So that's a very timely issue, and that's why the schedule is laid out as it is. Item 2D is to do a similar type of estimation and budget discussion with the 4 localities that are not impacted by the fall line to get an understanding of what those project priorities are. And then the final item there under 2E would be that TAC could provide an update on the prioritization process with the Cvta direction that we've heard that in the interim period, fall line and those rural projects would be the most impactful regional projects. So yesterday and today are big days. The next item is the full authority meeting on October 29th, where the full authority can get an update on the proceedings from these 2 advisory committees. And then staff will be prepared to provide an interim update to the governor's office on what that estimated budget is coming from finance and the estimated project costs coming from the TAC. And then the board would prepare for the next round of advisory committee meetings on November 8th and 10th. On the 8th, the TAC would hopefully have an action item on which project are the priorities to fund to bring back to the full authority. And then November 10th, finance would get an update on those priority projects and also have an action item on the regional budget. The next full board meeting, we only have 2 the rest of this calendar year. The next full board meeting is December 3rd. We would see action there, hopefully from the chair, to make that communication to the governor regarding any opportunities to supplement the fall line needs above the allotted regional funds. We would hopefully have an action item to allocate, or at least the mechanism to allocate to those non-fall line localities, regional funds. And then some type of a discussion about, and we need to work this out, how those projects would take their next step, whether it's a VDOT administered project, it's a local administered project, kind of the nitty gritty that I think TAC will provide some guidance on. And then after that, we would have some direction, and we would think that moving forward, finance would then see a monthly report of those regional project funds and expenditures and be able to track progress into the next cycle. The thing that we don't have, I know there's probably a ton of questions. The thing we don't have on this schedule is once these, the importance of the fall line and the related projects is understood, TAC sees a need to continue looking at that full 6-year period, which is why there's a proposal to go ahead and score and rank all of the projects that were identified in the long range plan so that we can then go through that full application process starting early spring of 22 to get an understanding of all the possible projects that can be funded through the 6-year period outside of that initial 2.
Mr. Chair, for a couple of questions.
Mr. Carroll.
Question for Mr. Brown. Do you think this letter needs to come sooner than December 3rd?
It depends. There are a lot of things happening in DC that anyone can guess. but based on the trajectory of things, I think a December 3rd is not too late.
Even for the state budget process.
Yeah. So what are you going to?
Well, I think that's, Mr. Carroll, that's one of the key points that TAC discussed yesterday was the timeliness of this. So that's why we put in 3C, which would be to provide an interim update. There wouldn't be actual action by the full authority by that date, but we should have an understanding, at least in round numbers, of what the budget is and what the project costs are going to be.
I mean, there's a lot of awareness of all the discussions and what's happening. And I don't know that December 3rd is too late. And of course, if there's any informal.
But we could put it on our November meeting to authorize the chair to do it. And then that way we don't have to wait till December. Then it can be written and ready to deploy. I don't want to wait till December and then find out for some reason we needed to get it in sooner.
Yeah.
If we're going to vote to do it, we do it, and then we can have the numbers and everything added into with that letter when they become available. But if for some reason we need to send it quicker, I'd rather have it approved ahead of time so we don't have to worry about it.
That makes sense.
I agree with Mr. Carroll on that one.
The other question I had to do with what's my train of thought here? I'll let someone else ask a question. I'll probably come back.
For clarification, so Brown, the December 3rd meeting, is that really serving as the November meeting? And then we're saying that we're not going to have a December board meeting?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay,
With the
so
holidays and schedules.
the December 3rd meeting is the board. Okay, just one, and I think this is more for the folks at home, because we talked a lot about the fall-on trail or fall-on funding. Just for clarification, the formal authority hasn't, we've expressed a strong interest in the fall line trail and that would be a priority, but there has not been a decision made, right? I mean, just to be clear that because one might read this document and presume that the decision's already been made about the fall line, but we are going to, per the code, get the scoring before we take formal action, which we think that will come later on December 3rd. And to Mr. Thornton's point, exercise that flexibility. The code requires us to score, but doesn't say per se that the funding scenario or approved projects have to per se adhere strictly to the score. It just means that we have to go through that process to have an understanding of the relative merit of the projects relative to each other. Is that a fair?
Very well said.
Okay.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, follow.
Mr. Carroll.
I actually remembered my question now.
We've done some grace.
Tough to get over. So when we talk about the 2045 plan and the scoring and ranking as you have listed, as was presented with the tax presentation on the 24th, there's a certain amount of projects each locality will also be able to submit. So it's not going to just be what projects are already in the 2045 plan, but perhaps it could also be an additional projects or different projects, for example, that Richmond may want to submit, and Hanover may want to submit, or Chester may want to submit. And those numbers were spelled out in the last month in what they look like. For example, I think 4 for Henrico, 4 for Chesterfield, and so forth and so on. So just for those who are watching, we'll make sure to understand that it's not just projects that are already in the 2045 plan that'll be under consideration. It could also be projects that are submitted to the TAC by the localities, that each locality, for example, I'll say Chesterfield County, our board of supervisors may get together and look at what our priority lists are. And we might say, yeah, we need to change that. And this is what we want to submit as our 8 projects, whatever it might be. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And that's a great point. I think that the focus is on consistency. So we hope that most projects are in the long range plan, but the mechanism in the framework that the TAC provided is that if a project is not in the long range plan, it can be applied for, and there would be further actions to make sure that it is in the long range plan at an upcoming date.
Just one. Thank you.
Mr. Parsons, you've spoken about the long-range plan, the 6-year plan. Would it be helpful, you think, for us to direct the finance director's working group to develop a 6-year program budget?
Yes, sir. That's a great decision. I would wholeheartedly support that.
We will need a motion for that.
So just clarification, Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
Would that program budget be different from the 390 that's identified here? I guess it could be if we decide to do some bonding. I guess that's is that what you're getting at?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
For those at home, yes.
Yes.
Is there a motion?
So move, Mr. Chairman. Your motion. What you said, right?
There's a motion to have staff work with the finance director's working group to develop a 6-year program budget. Is there a second?
Second, with comments.
It's been seconded by Mr. Carroll. Mr. Carroll?
I think, I guess my question is, in order for us to be able to do that, we need to know if we're going to bond first and actually what money we actually have to allocate in the budget in the first place. I think that we need to at least understand, what that's going to look like. But I don't know, maybe I'm wrong on that.
Wouldn't we use the advice of the working group to make those decisions?
To make a decision on whether we bond or not. I would think they would come forward to the full committee or the first year and the full committee for recommendations, absolutely.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think what I'm hearing is that you're asking the working group to look at the information we have today and based upon their expertise per section 4C on page 1, come up with the forecast that says, well, we think optimally based upon broader market conditions that we can turn this 390 in 6 years into 500. That would create certain, debt service obligations. But in light of that, we think you can program 500. And it kind of answers a question that I didn't ask, but I was thinking, which is, it's very hard, at Smart Scale, we identify how much money is available, and then we identify the projects to program to those dollars. And I think it's very hard when there's no limit or you're not aware of the limitation of your resources. Everybody can get very happy with regard to what they want to do, but only when you have those constraints are you able to really focus on what you should do, right? And so I think per the motion and your comment, if I'm understanding it correctly, we would ask the working group to come back with both the actual dollars, but also a forecasted plan that could, if they deem appropriately, include some portion of bonding if necessary.
That's correct. So are we hiring a part of what we have? I guess we're going to discuss later on a bonding agent to make those recommendations for us as well. I need to work closely with that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think when Mr. Smithers' item comes up, this is, it's sort of where everything's coming together, right? With the activities that the authority has been working on. And if this motion that's on the table goes through, then I think the finance working group, once a selection of a financial advisor is finalized, will have that as a resource to be able to help develop those scenarios and to determine, on the continuum where might the authority consider, that spectrum as we saw from the presentation earlier this spring of the PAYGO to fully, debt service projects. And so my expectation would be that the finance director's working group with support from the financial advisory team would be able to come back to this group with a set of scenarios. And then that could then forward to the authority to be able to, essentially develop your financing philosophy.
Mr. Chair. I think your idea is very good. I'm not too sure, though, it's not premature until we get the financial advisor and our executive director on board so that they can be involved with the working group on pulling the stuff together.
Well, I think the key word in the motion was staff to work with.
Okay.
Words. Staff to work with.
So we're not talking about making decisions before we have these professionals on board.
I don't believe there's any decision-making in the motion. I think it's just more the staff should begin working with the finance director's working group on the planning.
And Mr. Chairman, per that, and per the schedule here, would it be expected that they would come back by November 10th with whatever guidance they might have in order to stay consistent with the schedule, or can we push that out to the December?
Sorry, just
Ms. Cedar?
because I think Mr. Parsons and I have done a lot of thinking about kind of timeline and how these different processes are tracking with each other. I think that it's likely that the financial advisory services and the convening of the finance director's working group is going to extend beyond November 10th.
Okay.
And that's really going to be, correct me if I'm wrong, but the secondary evaluation of projects and strategy for the whole of the 6-year period, not necessarily the allocation of the 2 years. Is that what you're thinking?
I think that makes a lot of sense, and that gives a bit more cushion, but I guess my focus after the TAC meeting yesterday is the confidence on when we can get a number to the governor's office.
Mhm.
So if it needs to be earlier, I think that deadline needs to be sooner. So I think that's a discussion.
With the consideration, yep. Okay. Well, we have a motion. It's been seconded. Ms. Fires?
Thank you. Chesterfield County, Mr. Carroll.
Yes.
Hanover County, Vice Chair Peterson.
Yes.
Henrico County, Mr. Dalton.
Yes.
City of Richmond, Chair Stoney.
Yes.
Commonwealth Transportation Board, Mr. Brown.
Yes.
Thank you. That concludes roll call for that item.
Thank you, Ms. Fowler.
Mr. Chair, if I could just add one item that I'm thinking about. We're talking about funding for some things, going to the governor. There are more stakeholders than just our jurisdictions in CVTA on the things that we do. I'm thinking about Virginia tourism, for example. This fall line that we're talking about is going to be a great asset for Virginia tourism. Others, I think we need to make sure that they're aware of and part of the conversations we're having.
And how would you like to communicate that to Virginia tourism or even? You said, Mr. Craig?
Other stakeholders.
Yeah, and other stakeholders.
That's basically, you rephrased it better.
Okay.
We do need to make sure that they know what we're doing.
Yeah.
And if they want to participate, we'll be glad to have their help.
And what kind of participation are you thinking about, Mr. Peters?
Financial is fine.
I know Mr. Peterson only talks dollars and cents, so I wanted to get that out there on the record. We're not asking for promotions.
Well,
We could be, I guess, right?
Well, this is under the governor's auspices, and having their support could very well support our letter.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr.
Mr.
Thorpe.
Peterson does hit a point that we don't want to lose focus of. Usually you know what your organization is about. And we make the assumption or erroneously sometimes that the public knows it. So I do think we must make sure we do a more aggressive job of letting the total populace know there is a creature, an agency called the CVTA. And by any means that we can, we make sure we get that word out that we do exist and why does it exist? I think this is very important. We don't talk about that much because we're consumed with getting things in order. We need to get the word out so that people don't say, what is that? What is the CVTA?
All right.
Just to follow up on Mr. Thornton, I can't let it go. One of the things that Ms. Heater and I are discussing internally, but I think each of the organizations that are here, Plan RVA, is discussing separately is the need to tell that story. So at our last TPO meeting, we had a discussion about the need for people to understand what the TPO is and what we do. Similar thing with the CVTA as well as Plan RVA. So we're ramping up the options for participation, at least by Mr. Thornton, Mr. Williams, and Mr. Winslow as chairs of each of these boards to more formally discuss that outreach and storytelling and letting people know who we are and how we work with Virginia Tourism and all those other agencies and stakeholders in the region.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Carroll.
Perhaps it would be prudent for two things. Number one, for us to invite some of these stakeholders to come to our next full committee meeting and give them the opportunity to listen to what we're talking about and so that they can take that back and prepare their own messaging, and also recommend to all of 9 localities that are perhaps working on their legislative agendas to make sure they include these things in their legislative agenda that they send forward both to the governor's office and to the legislators to know that this is a regional priority and this is what the region is actually working on collectively, and to make sure that those legislators who are going to be, besides the 2 that we have on our committee, are also aware of what's going on.
That's right. Great opportunity for collaboration amongst the region. All right, we'll move on to the, is that you, Mr. Parsons?
If not, I believe Ms. Cedar actually.
Ms. Cedar, going to go ahead, please.
Well, I was going to defer to Debbie Basie in the back, but the financial report is included in the packet.
Volleyballing all over.
I know, right? Well, she is the expert, but it is included in the packet as well as the investment reports, and both Debbie Basie and Rebecca Longmaker are here. So I would say if there are questions, they would be the experts to refer. But as always, with thanks to them for the work that they do to support the CVTA.
Yes, thank you for your support of the CVTA. Are there any questions from the committee?
I'll just mention, I think this was raised before, but we saw a forecast last August, September. There was a lot of uncertainty as to whether or not those forecasts were going to be come to fruition. And so I do want to share that the numbers are looking good, probably better than expected. It's a little bit difficult to see that, compared if you looked at the 6-year forecast last fall that we saw, and then the numbers for example, for year to date. Remember, that's because of the lag. Sorry, that's because of the lag. So I would say that the forecast that VDOT had provided to us last fall have held. And so from a projection perspective, we are looking good, especially during a year that had a lot of uncertainty. So.
Okay. All right, the TAC update. Mr. Yuri?
I think we already covered that with the discussion regarding the framework document. So we did meet yesterday.
I just see you move away from the table, so I assume that we.
Yeah.
I want to be sure.
So we're good on that unless there's any questions.
Any questions from the committee? Thank you, Mr. Yuri. We'll move on to old business. Item 6 on our agenda is the Human Resource Roundtable Personnel Committee update. I'm going to have, do we have our roundtable members here today?
Yes.
You have 2?
Do you want to come to the table? It might be easier for people to hear you.
Would prefer us to come, absolutely.
Please, we welcome you.
2 seats right there.
Well, good morning. I'll start. I'm Janet Lawson, Director of Human Resources with Hanover County. And next to me is Yvette George with Henrico County. We represent 2 of the HR Roundtable, as we are affectionately known from Plan RVA. So several months ago, we had been contacted by Ms. Heater and Mr. Spoonhauer with the CVTA Personnel Committee with a request to review staffing models for CVTA. And then based on that, it's kind of run into next steps. So I'll start real quick. We did present to the Personnel Committee a proposed staffing model that included 3 options. And I believe at the end of the meeting, we wound up maybe making them 3 phases. So the first model was really having an executive director who was employed by CVTA, and all other staff, if you will, or functions are really through the current working groups that CVTA has. The second phase would be adding a support person to work directly with the executive director and the organization. That would also be a CVTA employee. And then the third phase would be expanding the staff to include a chief financial officer and a transportation and or planning lead. And then again, the authority may decide there's additional staff that they would like to employ. But that's how we initially started. Of course, there are only two other transportation authorities in the Commonwealth, Northern Virginia and HR TAC. So we did review their structure. We looked at their job descriptions specifically for their executive director, and we created a job description based on the two, but not a replica of either one specifically, but also recognizing Plan RVA and the uniqueness of the Central Virginia and the 9 jurisdictions that are supported by Plan RVA. We created a job description and a position profile. So at any point when the authority would like to proceed with recruiting for an executive director, we have materials ready to go. So when we did meet with the personnel committee, they did provide some great recommendations, such as including specific information about the background process that we have incorporated. There have been additional edits that were provided. So we are prepared, again, if and when you would like the HR roundtable to assist in that process. So after looking at the job description, the next piece was really looking at compensation and what would be an appropriate salary range for this position. I'm going to turn things over to Yvette because her team actually did the legwork on this.
Yes, and that's what we did. We basically did an overall analysis of about 21 PDCs in Virginia. We did some benchmarking, talked to them, and got 15 responses in regards to current salary and benefit information. So that's what we are presenting today, just the information in regards to what we found and the recommendations. And what we did, we did look at the salaries of NVTA and HR TAC. And do you want to hand out this information? Sure. Yeah, so we wanted to hand out some information. So we
That was the next question.
we're the handout. So definitely pull together some handout with some basic information and the data that we received from all of the PDCs, as well as NVTA and HR TAC. And it is front and back.
And we can send this electronically afterward to those who were not able to attend.
And what we're seeing here, you will see that MBTA, HR TAC, and CVTA are the only transportation authorities that are currently in Virginia. Both MBTA and HR TAC have an executive director along with additional staff. You see the current salary for MBTA executive director is $213,150. For HR TAC, executive director is $260. But we did look at the transportation considerations and the comparisons to kind of figure out why NVTA and HR TAC were the difference in salary were extreme. And we did find that there were some various reasons for that you will see on the document in front of you. And again, so there are currently 21 PDCs in Virginia. 15 responded to a request for current salary and benefit information. Now, for PDCs, only 3 support population exceeding 1 million, which are NVRC, HRPDC, and Plan RVA. Plan RVA supports the second largest local transit system, which is GRTC, and has the most interstate beltway for I-95, 295, 288, and 895. And the salaries for the top 3 range from 126 all the way up to over 200,000. Did you want to talk about the CVTA executive director position?
Yes, I already did that.
Okay. I didn't want you to go.
I don't think there is anything more.
Anything that you want to add in regards to that? So in regards to the salary recommendations, right. So what we propose is when we're advertising for the position, that we would basically put in the advertisement to negotiate based on experience and request the salary expectations from the recommended parties, basically, instead of posting a salary range out there. Because you're gonna basically, if you have somebody that comes in with minimal experience but have all the qualifications that you're looking for, it's gonna vary from somebody that has 10 to 15 to 20 years of experience working in this type of field.
So the one thing that we have not been able to obtain is the background of the two incumbents.
Correct.
MBTA and HR TAC, because we thought it would be important to know, did they hire two individuals that are engineers? Is one an engineer, one a planner? Just to try to, again, also understand perhaps the difference in the salary. From an HR perspective, we were a little surprised that Hampton Roads salary was higher than Northern Virginia. It's typically the opposite, but then looking at the level of complexity with Hampton Roads, that made sense to a degree as well.
Correct.
But one thing that we are still trying to obtain is the background for those two incumbents.
Just their years of experience.
And that would also help, I think, CVTA, as you're looking at candidates, again, once you're ready to move forward with recruiting, is, instead of posting a salary range and kind of pigeonholing yourselves, leave it negotiable. I think from the finance committee perspective, though, you need to have, I think you already have a budget line for personnel.
Right.
But you might need to consider what is a salary that we are willing to pay? And is that reflected in our budget? Again, right now, if you were to recruit and hire this year, you wouldn't have a full year salary because you're already almost halfway through the fiscal year.
Correct.
But as you're looking at budgeting for the following year, and if you put together a 5 or 6 year budget, I think it's important to consider what salary and benefits are you looking to offer to a viable candidate. And as you're looking at possible additional staff, whether it's just a support person, whether it's a CFO and a transportation lead, depending on the timing, if that's within the next 5 years, you need to make sure that's also included in your budget document.
Yeah, and that along with having the salaries that were proposed for, that are currently with MBTA and HR TAC will kind of help guide that as well.
So we'll stop here and see if you all have any questions.
Ms. George,
Yes, sir.
on your thing here, you indicate that the executive director, both in Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads, are making approximately 30% more than the PDC executive director. Is that the PDC in their area that you ranked it to? Or
Yes,
is that the general PDC across the state?
No, within their area.
Within their area,
But in Northern Virginia, the PDC and their acronym, MBTA,
Yes, sir.
they're married,
Actually,
unlike in Hampton Roads.
Actually, I heard, my understanding, it was the opposite, that MBTA was separate from their planning district commission.
Correct.
But HR TAC is very much collaborates and has a relationship with the Hampton Roads Planning
Right,
District
and
Commission.
Hampton Roads, they coexist, but it's a completely separate organization. In Northern Virginia, one thing she can present to us.
Mhm.
There is more of a marriage between the PDC and the MBTA structure. And it was from inception in that case. I mean, one comment that I can make about Hampton Roads, having some familiarity with Kevin and because Kevin actually consulted very actively as we were drafting the legislation, the CVTA. Hampton Roads is a bit of a tiger to try to wrangle. And so,
Correct.
and I think there's a question, this is more of a philosophical question, as to whether or not an organization needs an administrative person to execute versus someone to lead, right, to help shape and form the vision, and then lead the region into the fulfillment of that, right? And I think what happened with Kevin, who actually started here in Richmond and had some experience with GRTC and some other organizations, is he was recruited with that being the call, right? That we needed someone who, we don't know what we're doing, we don't know how to do it, we're not even sure we can do it, but we want you to build it and then take it. Whereas Northern Virginia had a much longer history both legislatively and organizationally. They had maybe what I'm remembering is they had a list of programs, projects they wanted to execute. And that position was more about administering. Now it's evolved, but that's my understanding as to how those two roles and maybe some of the distinction in the functionality. But I think your point is correct that we need to figure out what we want.
Yes,
Do we
sir.
want a leader or meaning someone that will help wrangle us, right? And figure out all the stuff that we need to do? Or do we want to do that work ourselves and then say, hey, we need someone to shepherd the vision that we've articulated? I think that's a question that we have to articulate.
Right.
It sounds like that's a question for the body at large,
All right.
not just for the member localities represented today. I know what I want, but Any more questions for the roundtable?
Well, I guess our question is, what action do we want to take here to the full board at the end of this month?
Well, I know based on Mr. Brown's, statement, obviously our vision, the administrative costs have to match the vision. Am I wrong? And so if we want this bold leader who will lead us the way and alleviate the work from our plates, then we need the finances to match that sort of style of a leader. If we want someone to shepherd this, it's probably going to be a different cost structure. And so maybe this either may not be a bad idea that we get some sort of idea on the first couple of phases of that cost structure. What does that look like? Can we do that?
I think I'd be very happy to work maybe with the roundtable to absorb the information and then work with you all to perhaps come back. So my brain I'm thinking about process, and I know that there's a sense of urgency, and Mr. Thornton, I don't know if the expectation would be that we want to move a conversation forward at the end of this month and open up that. Mr. Brown's question, I think, is pivotal to the conversation.
I agree.
So I'm
And the next full body meeting is when?
The 29th.
Because I believe, from Mr. Chairman, from our talks, at the personnel committee meeting, is that, we've looked at hiring of an ED or a CEO, whatever we want to call it. An additional staff might occur around July 1, 2022. Or June, between that time period, July 1, 2022 and June 30, 2023. So that's represented in the new MOU we have, with Plan RVA as well. So we got to think about timing around all this as well. And so how do we get those answers as quickly as possible to start planning this out?
Mr. Chair, is it, and if I may, I'd like to ask our working group here I think we've been given the responsibility of making some recommendations to the full board. And the personnel committee has done so as well. With that, we've got 3 scenarios that the personnel committee looked at.
Yes.
I think we should be able to come up with a fairly simple range of what the annual cost would be for each of those scenarios fairly quickly. That could be shared with the full board. And, this is the financial impact's going to be in this range for 1, this range for 2, this range for 3.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think that would probably be helpful to the full authority.
I agree with you,
Mr. Chair.
it's not that difficult.
I think it's a consideration that Mr. Brown brought up some very good points, but there's a consideration that needs to be taken in when we talk about whether or not how we're going to negotiate a salary with someone that's coming in. Part of the consideration needs to be on these projects. Once we decide how they're going to be financed, is who's actually going to do the project. Is VDOT going to do the project? Is the locality going to manage the project? So some of the smaller localities that don't have the capabilities that the bigger localities do, they may have to rely solely on VDOT to do all the managing of the project, period. Or they may have to rely on the CVTA to actually help manage the project for them. And so I think part of the discussion, if you're going to, when we talk about who's going to be in that leadership role, is part of what are they actually going to do, right? So are they going to have to work closely with VDOT to make sure that the projects get managed? Or are they going to actually manage projects themselves on behalf of the CVTA? And so the discussion with the localities, quite frankly, is going to have to be, when you submit your projects, what's your expectation on how they're going to be managed? I think most of the small ones probably have VDOT do them right now.
Mr. Chair, if I can follow up on that, though, I think the caution, the CVTA is a funding organization. We do not manage projects.
I concur.
And
so that's why it's important to understand what the role is going to be of the person we hire, so they understand when they come in what it is.
Now, I think
these young ladies here have said they've already put together a profile to go out. I think that would be good if we could see what that profile is that they have.
I was going to say, the personnel committee has been working on all this with the help of the HR roundtable as well. So we have a good idea. I mean, there are some who are, we've even spoken about this at length, I think, at the past personnel committee meetings of hiring someone who has the expertise to tell us where we need to go, instead of us trying to figure that part out.
And we have updated that profile. We'll forward that to the personnel committee.
Perfect.
And you can forward it as deemed necessary.
As Mr. Brown said, and I think it's correct, I think we need a shepherd rather than just somebody to tell what to do. So that is going to affect us financially with a higher cost.
But as you said, Mr. Peterson, there's a range, right? I mean, we won't be too far off the range.
You can't give the full authority any more than a range.
That's right.
You can give them a range that we would anticipate that it would be in.
Exactly.
So I think that's fair.
And I don't think there's a $100,000 gap in that range, I would say. If so, I might be quitting my job and go do something like that.
Between 1 and 3, there is.
You might not be the only one. Like someone tendered their resignation. Not me. All right. Any further questions on the topic of with the HR roundtable? Thank you so much for the presentation. All right, now we move to item 7 of our agenda, which has been amended for us to enter into closed session.
I'll read the motion if someone would like to.
I was going to do it, but you go ahead right ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go right ahead.
Apologies. Motion, if there is a motion that the finance committee would convene in closed meeting pursuant to section 2.2-3711A29, Code of Virginia 1950 as amended, for the discussion of a public contract involving the expenditure of public funds and the discussion of the terms or scope of the such contract, where discussion in open session would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body, during which all recording of this meeting will cease. Is there a motion?
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second. There's been a motion and it's been seconded. I guess I have to repeat the whole entire motion prior to the vote.
That's our process.
In the motion that the finance committee convene in closed meeting pursuant to section 2.2-3711 Code of Virginia 1950 as amended, for the discussion of a public contract involving the expenditure of public funds and discussion the terms or scope of such contract, where discussion in an open session would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiation strategy of the public body, during which all recording of the meeting will cease. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? None? The motion carries. I ask that all staff and guests to leave the meeting
Mr. Chair, if I may, I think some members of staff might be appropriate to stay in the meeting. Mr. Smither is here to present the item, and there may be other locality staff that have been involved in the process that you would invite to stay if you'd like.
Do you have any recommendations on those individuals?
Ms. White is from the city of Richmond, is on this committee, and so if it's appropriate, I think we'd invite her to stay virtually, and I would certainly defer to those here who have likely a stake in the conversation too.
It works for me. Does it work for everyone else? Everyone else?
I'm fine with my administrator staying.
Okay.
We're just gonna figure out how to,
Make sure nothing's going out live. Once we
Yeah.
Pause the Zoom, we
Pause
want
it.
to make sure we're.
Yeah, I was
We
like,
did
this is technical.
well, it says it's paused, but it's, I don't see it paused up there. So can you check the YouTube feed, please?
Let me do that from us.
Thank you.
Okay. Take a.
It's all on there.
That's what it is.
We're live.
It's all on BBC.
Versus.
It's really.